Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. Time now to go to Argentina and talk with independent consultant on risk management and author of the new ebook, The Coming World Government, Tragedy and Hope, Adrian Salbuchi. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Before I ask you about your new book, I want to ask you about Greece. Is the nature of the financial attack on Greece similar to what happened in Argentina in 2001, 2002?
Well, sadly, yes, because we are seeing almost a copy of exactly what happened in Argentina. The major difference being that what happened in Argentina in 2001 and 2002 could be just limited to only affecting Argentina. So they just let us fall and crash, and Argentina's GDP fell 40% in just 1 year, and 50% of the population fell below the poverty line, whilst in Greece, it is so tied into the euro that they cannot take the liberty of allowing Greece to fall just like that. Otherwise, they would. It's the difference between having your own currency and having somebody else's currency.
Right. So in the case of Greece or Ireland, or even it looks like Italy and looks like Spain will be sucked into this vortex of deceit. The banks, the major global banks, the international banks, they get the local governments like Papadreas to commit fraud on behalf of the banks, to load the economies up with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of debt. In the case of Greece, we're talking now 500 billion euros in debt that was illegally parked onto their balance sheet. And then when they can't pay back the debt, they take all their assets as recompense for the debts that they never incurred. But you're saying the big difference, of course, is that in Greece, they're part of the Eurozone, so you have this contagion effect, whereas in Argentina, it was a self-contained economy, and it was a bit of a silo effect that just happened within the confines of that economy, correct?
Exactly. So, yeah, that's exactly the point. We have to see above everything that this is really all part of a model. We are dealing with a global power elite, whether you're in Argentina, whether you're in Greece, whether you're in Britain, or even in the United States, a global power elite that is above all nation states. That's why for many decades now, they have declared public enemy number one, the sovereign nation state, which is the only institution that can really stand up to them. And what they seek time and again is to fully control nations. Now, each nation has a different characteristic that will enable it to be controlled. Some nations need to be controlled through outright military invasion, but that looks very bad on the 6 o'clock news, as we learned from Iraq and from Vietnam many decades ago. So what they do is they finance and install caretaker governments where the presidents and prime ministers basically act as chief executive officers, and then through them they get them to enact the necessary measures and laws that will indebt a country like Argentina or Greece, and then they come in and say, you can't pay back. They never could pay back, so you're going to have to refinance, increase our balance sheet assets, and they just kick it over, roll it over, and at the same time they are able to impose their agenda through the local caretaker governments so that they can suck in all the wealth of Argentina, the natural resources, and the same happens with Greece, and we are seeing that the world over, where all profit are privatized and all losses are socialized.
Now, in the case of the Eurozone, it's kind of interesting in that you've got the contagion effect, and it's spreading to other economies, slightly larger economies. Of course, Greece is a $300 billion economy. It's not even as big as Apple, the software and computer company. It's not as big as Exxon, one U.S. company. Or you have Ireland, similarly, it's a $200 or $300 billion economy. Spain is, of course, obviously a larger economy than that, but still not a significantly larger economy. So you've got this contagion spreading. However, at the center of the Eurozone is Germany, and Germany benefits from this catastrophe because of the lower euro. It helps their export market. Now, how can Germany be guaranteed that they, by participating in the wholesale financial rape of Greece, how can Germany protect itself from the contagion wiggling its way into Germany? Or did they haven't thought that far and they're simply going to be swallowed up by this financial contagion?
Well, I think, Max, there are two levels of interpretation. First of all, from the national point of view, from Germany's point of view, and I should even say Germany and France, since Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy, together with European Central Bank President Jean-Claude Trichet, have agreed on a common stance on the upcoming negotiations regarding Greece. On a national stance, yes, they do perhaps look at the short-term benefit that they might get from balancing the euro out, stabilizing matters, and so forth. But I still believe, and I insist on this, that there is a global power structure that is way above Berlin, way above Paris, even way above London and Washington, although they might operate from those capitals, that have other longer-term plans in mind. Personally, I believe that it has a lot to do with the introduction of a global currency, which will not be in the hands of any one sovereign nation. Now, to transition towards that global currency, and Germany knows this very well because they're part of the game, will require the controlled demise of both the dollar and the euro. So the dollar's demise will come through hyperinflation. Quantitative easing 1, 2, and coming 3 has already hyperinflated the dollar, and we know a lot about hyperinflation in Argentina because we went through it in 1989. Whilst the way to break up the euro when the right time comes is just breaking it up, because it is not hyperinflated. However, it is politically weak, because if Greece were to pull out, and Spain were to pull out, and Portugal were to pull out, maybe even the Germans might decide to go back to the old Deutschmark, because it would might even make life easier for them. But their governments are so aligned to this global agenda that they wouldn't dare do that unless they are told by their bosses.
All right, currently what we're hearing out of Brussels and the confab, made up of the leaders of various countries and these international organizations, is that they want to expand the concept of a European credit facility. They want to create a new lending facility which would be, let's say, 10 to 20 trillion euros in size. And going back to the Davos conference of the past year, it was discussed that to solve the global financial crisis, a new lending facility of $100 trillion needs to be created. So the policymakers and these global institutions, their answer is always exactly the same: more debt, more loans, more interest cost, more fees for bankers. Is it inevitable that hyperinflation visits the global economy, as we saw in Argentina? Is that a done deal in your view?
In a way, what Argentina, or I as an Argentine citizen, can bring to the table is first-hand experience at mass devaluations, hyperinflation, and systemic banking collapses. I think, first of all, one of the things that I say very often to my people down here is, how can a country or an organization or even an individual that has as his basic problem a debt problem, how can you solve a debt problem by incurring even more debt? So the fact that they are setting up all these slush funds of billions and hundreds of billions and even trillions of dollars merely shows that they are dead set on making the game roll on, roll on, and roll on. This is like a merry-go-round. They need to have the whole debt paradigm embedded into our minds, embedded into our systems, whilst what they do is they ensure that people don't realize that if we were to make good, proper use of public money, and by public money I mean the actual sovereign currency that any state can issue, which is non-interest bearing, because it is banking interest that is at fault when it comes to the major source of inflation. I think that we have to look and say, well, are these just a series of very bad mistakes, or is there a plan behind this? And I personally believe, and that's what my book deals with, there is a plan behind this. And the plan is basically to set up a world government which needs to transition away from globalization and towards a more formal world government. And I know we have very little time, but I think the point, especially to our American friends, to say is that just as when the global power elite decided to move from the bipolar post-World War II world towards globalization 21 years ago, they had to engineer the demise of the former Soviet Union. Now, as they are wrapping up globalization and ushering in world government, which is what I describe in my book, the other superpower has to go. It's the United States of America that they now need to go into the waste bin of history, because a formal world government cannot tolerate that any one major nation state, sovereign nation state, should still be in existence, because we've had the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas in power, and they've been very aligned to the global power elite. But what would happen if a true patriot were to make it to the White House? So in a way, I think that what we are seeing is not only the engineering of the demise of the dollar and the euro to replace it by a global currency, but even the geopolitical demise of the United States of America, which might help to explain why their problems will only get worse in the coming weeks and months.
Right. Well, S&P and the other rating agencies are already talking about downgrading U.S. debt, and other foreign rating agencies have already downgraded U.S. debt. So they're tenderizing the meat, so to speak, before they cook it. And the downgrade of U.S. debt is baked into the cake, to use another cooking metaphor. And yes, the U.S. will lose its predominance in the global economy, and anyone who's not a U.S. citizen, the other 95% of the world's population, of course, would benefit from that. Now, finally, let me just return to Argentina for a second. How did Argentina deal with its banker infestation problem? How did it get rid of the banking scum?
Well, we didn't. It's still here. One of the, as a key example, which is even worse in America, during our 2001-2002 systemic banking, financial, and currency meltdown, as I said, the people suffered huge amounts of hardship. They went out into the street. They banged on the doors of the banks, which were very, very hermetically shut closed. And yet, when the whole crisis was over, not one single bank, Max, not one single bank folded, although millions of Argentinians lost their homes, lost their savings, etc., lost their pensions, and so forth. So in a way, they use psychological warfare because they know that people end up getting used to whatever comes to them. It's basic human psychology. In a way, that the great advantage that Argentina certainly has, and that Ireland, Spain, Italy, even Greece do not have, is that Argentina is immensely wealthy from its natural resources. We are a country that is the 8th territory in the world. We should have 140 million people, and yet we are only 40 million. And look at the irony, a small population in an immensely wealthy territory, and yet half the population is below the poverty level. This clearly shows that there is a plan. There is a basic agenda, because then when other countries run into trouble, whether it be Brazil and Mexico at the end of the 90s, Greece, Ireland, Iceland, Portugal, Italy, and Spain, now in Europe, even the United States, you see the same pattern coming time and again. And when you see the same pattern, it's because there's a model. And when there is a model, A, somebody is planning it, and B, most important, a model is predictable. So it's very important we start to understand how the model works so that it can become predictable, and we can take the necessary measures to mitigate and even to compensate all these coming woes that are affecting practically every country. Today it's Greece, tomorrow it'll be Britain and even America.
All right, Adrian Salbuchi, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max. My pleasure.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. If you want to send me an email, please do so at kaiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all.